Hello, Wonder. Tonight I'll take you to a time when a camel bell carried by a desert wind could mean a lesson was about to begin. Where history still breathes and stars shimmer not only in the sky but across parchment. In Timbuktu, when a caravan stirred, it didn't just mark travel. It signaled that wisdom was awake and it always preferred the night. Tuareg guides whispered gold dust tales by the low crackle of a brazier. One weighed nuggets with date seeds, another counted constellations. For fun. But no one ever raised their voice, because the desert listens best in silence. Soon, we'll wander through the manuscripts of Sinker. The ink still glows golden, and sentences flicker like stardust caught between thoughts. A candle may flicker out. A margin note may appear like a sigh, so ... Dim your lights, place your headphones gently, and if possible, sit near an open window. As the wind carries the night, we'll drift with it. If these kinds of quiet journeys soothe you too, you might consider subscribing just so we meet again. And if you leave a comment with your time and location, perhaps the next story will. Start with the breeze that found you. You might not expect that a single camel bell drifting through desert wind could announce an entire midnight lecture, but in Timbuktu it does, and it does so without any hurry at all. The bell's copper ring evaporates into sand-scented darkness, and Sanker's mud brick minaret absorbs the echo like a polite librarian shelving an overdue thought. A lone scholar adjusts his indigo turban, flips a palm leaf fan once, then lets the night resume its soft exhalation. Camel hooves leave crescents in powder, fine soil little diacritical marks, spelling words nobody bothers to read before. Morning. Historians later calculate that a well-paced caravan covers the distance between two of those crescents in the time it takes goat-hide drums in the market to finish a single, slow heartbeat of rhythm. That utterly unnecessary fact survives in a margin note dated 1587. Written in ink the color of sunset remembering pomegranates, the Tuareg guides lounge near a low brazier, trading gold dust tales with the unblinking composure of people who measure seasons in constellations rather than calendars. They speak of ounces mistaken for pinches and of merchants who once weighed nuggets against the heft of a date. Palm seed, arguably the first known instance of someone getting shortchanged. By fruit. A novice scribe listens, half thinking about exchange rates, half wondering if the fire sparks might be small messengers trying to dictate footnotes to the wind. He jots a calculation on the edge of his wax tablet anyway. If 10 mythicals of gold buy 40 measures of salt, how many bedtime stories does that purchase? The answer, obviously, is always one more than you thought, because caravan math obeys yawns, not abacuses. Every so often the brazier pops and someone jokes that. Even embers negotiate interest. Nearby, a camel grumbles, perhaps correcting the conversion table. Nobody minds. In Timbuktu, corrections are best delivered with soft, uneven cadence, suitable for lulling scholars and livestock alike into shared contemplation. Inside the Sinker, madrasa manuscripts wait on wooden rehouse stands, their pages breathing a slow perfume of acacia gum, lampblack, and distant rain that never quite reached the Sahel. Each parchment corner curls a little, as though stretching before another century of stillness. According to one brittle ledger, the proper distance between two verses should fit 3 grains of local barley laid end to end. Anything wider risks letting idle daydreams trespass. Tonight, candles droop, and the smoke scribbles ephemeral calligraphy above the scholars' heads. An elder with henna-bright fingertips turns a folio, revealing golden ink that once cost the price of 2 camels. Each named after verses of the Quran nobody remembers precisely, yet everyone recites from muscle memory. The ink glints like a discreet meteor caught between letters, reminding the reader that even sentences enjoy jewelry. A visiting student counts how many strokes in the bismillah shimmer compared to those in an ordinary conjunction. finds the ratio pleasantly disproportionate, and decides not to share the discovery lest it start a trend of gilded commas. That restraint will be footnoted by another scribe 3 decades later in exactly the same margin, proving that silence can be hereditary. Muezzin shadows stretch as morning tiptoes westward, and the first chant rises from Jingarbur's tower. Low and elongated like a camel's sigh turned musical, the sound drifts across rooftops where date coffee simmers in brass pots, thick as unspoken proverbs. A scholar pauses mid-meditation, inhales cardamom steam, and notes quite pointlessly that the ideal brew time aligns with the time. It takes sand to fill a shallow well left by last night's scorpion. His neighbor replies that scorpions conduct the most punctual of desert clocks, though their alarm feature is best avoided. Both agree this information deserves preservation, so they write it in the margins next to a discussion of lunar eclipses, confident future generations will appreciate the cross-reference. Outside, the date palms rustle a commentary that sounds dangerously like applause, but really is just wind rehearsing its own reading. Soon, sunrise nudges golden ink into mimicry, and pages rest. Satisfied their stories have glowed twice in one night, once by candle, once by dawn. Camels shift, bells ready to ring again, and the Tory guides fold sleeping mats with a slowness suggesting fabric holds broader wisdom than parchment ever will. Somewhere in the quiet, a novice decides that the distance between camel bells might also measure the span between waking and dreaming. He writes that theory down in letters shaped like footprints crossing a dune, then packs his stylus away so the thought can wander undiscovered for a century, maybe 2. And if drowsiness happens to touch your own eyelids now, consider it merely a courteous scholar bowing out after midnight debate, leaving the rest of the lecture to silence, sand, and the gentle reassurance that golden ink still glimmers somewhere in the dark folds of Timbuktu's unhurried heart. You might not expect that the thin mouth of a letter slot, the quiet rectangle through which envelopes pass like shy theater tickets, could draw cabinet makers into midnight geometry, lure lighthouse keepers to time drafts with measuring tapes, and spark one mercifully brief fad for cinnamon-scented mail flaps fixed exactly 43 millimeters high. Yet here we are, drifting through the unhurried chronicle of postbox aperture dimensions. If you're still awake by the time a Dublin postmaster confides that 40 millimeters, whispers security without chewing corners, feel free to subscribe or simply let your thoughts glide. Slots have swallowed paper long before algorithms. Learn to refresh dot. At first there were only door cracks and capable knuckles. Georgian footmen slid folded notes beneath panels, clipping wax seals on carriage lanterns, while dogs debated whether alarm or apathy suited the hour. Then London's penny post arrived in 1680, and grocers repurposed biscuit tins as neighborhood drop boxes. Their lids gaped unevenly, 6 fingers wide here, 3 there, depending on who last pried biscuits loose. A tinsmith named Purvis soldered rails to force a straight opening, guessing 2 thumb widths tall about 35 millimeters because that spared his cuff from soot when fishing letters at dusk. Customers applauded fewer bent corners, and soon taverns adopted Purvis slots, each one stenciled with a polite reminder to fold bills, not shove them. An errant scholar measured 50 boxes along Tim's Row and found the median height precisely 36, a number he declared as comforting as porridge. His pamphlet sank into drawer dust, yet left behind a whisper. 30-something. Millimeters felt unusually considerate dot across the channel. Paris experimented with wall-mounted boats sporting enameled lips. Bureaucrats proposed 40 millimeters to accommodate tri-folded folios sealed by overachieving wax blobs shaped like tiny sleep masks. Postal clerks complained about drafts, pigeons nested on escutcheons. Nevertheless, 40 held. When the July monarchy collapsed, Revolutionaries briefly widened some slots with chisels so pamphlets could enter in frantic bundles 50, 60, even 70 millimeters for one excited fortnight until Masons restored order with calmer bricks and a new decree, 42 tout court, issued on stationery printed. Somewhat ironically, double-spaced .STEA Miss H IPs then ferried ideas as eagerly as cargo. New York street boxes in 1858 adopted a modest 40 millimeters but curved the lower lip outward like a mustache, guiding snowmelt away from stamps. Inland, Chicago Ironworks trimmed height to 33, arguing that prairie winds needed fewer invitations. The trade catalog described its slot as a purse-lipped sentinel, thrifty, firm, yet no miser. One micro hook slips by every half minute. A clerk tested wind ingress by holding a candle behind open doors and recording. Flicker angles. His table concluded each extra millimeter above 38 doubled flame anxiety. The study never reached headquarters because a candle toppled, singeing both report and doormat, reinforcing in its own heated way the case for narrowness. Early 20th century postcards forced a rethink. Photographers trimmed city skylines into cards that blushed at being bent. Engineers convened over tea, complaining that current slots scuffed sunsets and decapitated steeples. Britain's General Post office trialed 45 millimeter apertures on 7 pillar boxes painted experimental Swaledale green. The color garnered more attention than the slot. Still, carriers logged fewer postcard casualties. When wartime rationing forbade new hues, the red returned, but the 45 remained, tucked beneath a war economy too busy to notice decimals. Meanwhile, Berlin's yellow Kasten flirted with 48 to swallow packages of ration coupons. Archivists later found that extra 3 millimeters accounted for 20% faster cue movement. Proving boredom can sometimes be graft. Plastic became persuasive in the 1960s, and suburban mail flaps acquired springy lips eager to slap closed against bees. Springs favored slightly taller openings, 41 or 42 less envelopes stall mid-gulp. Marketing called it the sure seal action, though real innovation lay in a drip bridge that whisked rain off address ink. Australian post engineers, facing sideways squalls, tested slots at 39 with rubber gaskets. Parrots chewed the gaskets into confetti, so all rubber migrated inside where curious beaks could not audit design decisions. Around the same time, a Canadian ski town commissioned heated letterboxes with slots widened to 46 to accept Mitten Clumsy. Thrusts, an unplanned side effect. Warmth coaxed local snow hares to Napa top lids, compressing springs until slots sagged to 44 by March. The only documented case of fauna dictating aperture revision, the data entry epic brought envelopes, padded with bubble optimism 2 centimeters thick. Logistics panels fretted. Should slots grow again? Quiet compromise emerged. Retain 40, but add blue decals directing bulky mail to counters. The decals worked about as well as lullabies on espresso, so some towns installed side carousels. Polite way of saying, try here first. Academics measured compliance at 42% and published in a journal nobody shelved properly. Still, the experiment birthed a global average slot hovering at 42, hitchhiking on Douglas Adams. Jokes, though, conceived for turbulent studies. Eco designers in the 2010s proposed bamboo lids coupled with 38 millimeter smiles to deter junk catalogs. Test sites reported a modest reduction in unsolicited flyers, but a spike in paper cuts from ambitious recyclers. Municipalities compromised anew. 40 remains default, bamboo optional, catalog volume unwavering. Somewhere, a startup pitched smart slots scanning barcodes before acceptance. Prototypes with motorized shutters became stuck at 31 millimeters after firmware updates, leading carriers to wedge mail with spatulas. The project dissolved, leaving behind a cautionary tweet about overthinking rectangles. Pick any. Letterbox you encounter tomorrow. Eye the narrow space between flap and frame. Trace with imagination's calipers that small dimension, perhaps 39, perhaps 43 if the hinge grew sentimental in wet seasons. Rest a palm against cool metal. Feel how centuries of fussy measurement have resolved into. This modest invitation, big enough for folded news, tight enough to hush gossip. Inhale as if sliding an envelope inward. Exhale as slot returns to stillness again, until breath learns the rhythm of anonymous paper finding dark interior. When lids at last stop rattling and midnight post lumbers through quiet streets, picture all those rectangles aligning in unseen harmony, the global choir of 40-something millimeter mouths, waiting for tomorrow's soft negotiations of ink and air, while you drift, envelope light, into your own private postmarked sleep. You might not expect that the hush white ribbon unspooling from a cash register, that flimsy strip which later languishes in pockets alongside lint and half-remembered errands, could coax millwrights to squint at micrometers, invite tax clerks to debate font weights for decimal points, and ignite one mercifully short craze for vanilla-scented thermal rolls cut exactly 57 millimeters wide. Yet here we are, drifting through the drowsy chronicle of receipt paper widths. If you're still awake by the time in Milwaukee, shopkeeper murmurs that 44 millimeters makes even bad arithmetic look slender. Feel free to subscribe or simply recline. The paper will keep curling, receipt after receipt. Whether or not anyone tabs the total of listeners' dot, it begins in the late 1870s when James Ritty's incorruptible cashier clacks across a saloon counter and stamps sales onto a 2-inch ribbon of manila, 2 inches being the width of a cigar box slot Ritty's brother happened to trim that morning. The printer wheel yawns comfortably across 48 millimeters, leaving margins wide enough for whiskey dribbles to dry without smudging totals. Barrelhouse bookkeepers praise the blank side columns perfect for noting which patron still koshan still owes 23 cents for pickled eggs, though one bartender complains the ribbon runs out before midnight, inspiring the first recorded sigh about consumable overhead. By 1898, rival registers trumpet a broader tape, 57 millimeters, ample for bolder type and promotional slogans like buy soap, live respectable. Engineers justify the new size by pointing to gear pitch and the pleasing geometry of a circle divided by 5.5. Proofs nobody double checks because the math, like the marketing, arrives after factory whistles quit for supper. Soon department stores bloom, and their registers multiply like coat buttons. Paper. Scramble. They slice logs of rag pulp into rolls measured by rule of thumb rather than rule of caliper. So widths wobble a millimeter left or right depending on humidity and who had first dibs on the whetstone. A rye clerk in Cincinnati keeps tally. 47 point something today, 49 tomorrow. He writes that variation comforts him, as though totals come with built and small talk. His notebook, browned by ledger dust, survives in a private archive. Nobody cites it, yet its sentiment hovers in every micro tuck of the feed lever machines, murmuring, "Close enough, lad." The tolerance tightens only after the 1910 Boston Tax Board decrees that columns must align for spot audits. Inspectors carry brass gauges slotting neatly onto rolls. Anything under 46 receives a frown. Anything over 50 earns a lecture about wasted pulp. Mill foremen repaint their cutters' alignment lines, shifting average output to a crisp 48.5. A number that looks trustworthy because decimals lull the nervous. World War I interrupts refinement. Flax for linen paper. Heads to bandage warehouses, and registers dine on rougher stock sliced to whatever blade still holds edge. Post-war, an Ohio inventor unveils thermal acid reactive coating, and discovers it prints most legibly at widths no narrower than 57 millimeters, the chemistry demanding space to bloom charcoal black characters without squeezing. Retail magazines hail the modern tape, though haberdashers persist with 44 millimeter rolls, arguing narrower tapes slip more gracefully into jacket pockets. A micro hook slips by. A London tailor measures crease depth and returned receipts, concluding that 44 folds thrice before cracking, whereas 57 fractures at the second bend, like a gentleman refusing small talk. His findings circulate among stationers, and for a brief season, the width of a receipt telegraphs sartorial preference, narrow for waistcoats, broad for overcoats, until accountants reclaim the decision by ordering whatever stock arrives first. After inventory panic dot the mid-century neon decades, clang cash drawers like symbols, and supermarkets weaponize itemization, needing 2 columns of figures plus a slogan promising plat stamps. Printers stretch carriage width to 80 millimeters, and even 3 1/8 inches, because that matches a handy hardwood dowel diameter already mass-produced for curtain rods. A Detroit grocer applauds the surplus space for Think. You drive safely, printed in italics, large enough for near-sighted grandmothers. The roll, however, bulges like a small melon, clerks lifting spares spraying wrists, leading register makers to have roll core diameter so the same footage. Curls tighter, thermal coatings improve, characters shrink, and by 1975 debates flare at office supply expos. 80 grants generosity, 57 whispers economy, 44 suggests boutique frugality. In one panel, a statistician asserts 80 wastes, 7% more shelf life because shoppers trash receipts unread. A marketing director counters that wider tape sounds like value when crinkled. The panel ends without verdict, and dinner reservations proceed on napkins measuring, ironically 45 millimeters folded. Computers arrive, hunching over a dot matrix printers that nibble fanfold forms far broader than any drawer tape. Yet cash registers cling to familiarity. Convenience stores elect 57 as global compromiser, Goldilocks dimension where barcode digits nest nicely, and coupons still dangle with serrated theatrics. Paper mills optimize slitters. Tolerance shrinks to plus minus 0.2 millimeters. Inspectors retire brass gauges for micrometer wheels that spin like fidget toys. Thermal formulas ditch BPA, add vitamin C rumors. And for one quiet quarter experiment with vanilla oil microcapsules that release scent when heat activated. The capsules drift toward printer heads, gumming gears. Technicians protest. Vanilla vanishes, leaving legend and a faint craving for pastry each time a roll warms. Then arrives the era of email receipts. Forecasts predict paper extinction, but bakeries still need something to cushion sticky buns from coin change. Tiny battery-powered printers emerge, dispensing 38 millimeter strips resembling fortune cookie prophecies. They jam, they fade in sunlight. Customers photograph totals instead, and the world keeps spinning. A sustainability conference proposes QR codes projected on countertop light. Yet, during trials, grandfathers ask for something to put in the bookkeepers. Tin, and the project slows. Cash drawers and corner groceries persist with 57. Posh cafes revert to 44, citing artisan intimacy. Hardware megastores stick with 80 because bolts are heavy and receipts must echo heft. ISO quietly issues guidance. Common width shall be 44 millimeters plus or minus 0.5, 57 millimeters plus or minus 0.2, and 80 millimeters plus or minus 0.3. The standard weighs 32 pages, but it's just Tums whenever a clerk tears tape against a serrated edge designed incidentally by someone who favored prime numbers and chose 79 teeth. Pick up any receipt crumpled nearby. Smooth it gently. Measure by memory. A thumbprint and a breath might equal 44. 2 thumbprints and a shrug approach 57. Anything wider caresses palm lines like a napkin disguised as proof of purchase. Notice the grain, the sheen, the faint chemical promise of letters fading by next solstice. Inhale the nearly paperless air. Exhale across the strip, watching it lift and settle like a thin idea deciding where to nap. Somewhere within those margins lies every argument ever whispered between mill blades and marketing slogans, between pocket depths and ledger widths. Let their measured quiet guide your breathing line by line, millimeter by chosen millimeter, until totals blur, ink relaxes, and the long tape of wakefulness curls softly into darkness, its diameter perfect for dreaming. You might not expect that the inky ribbon coiled inside an old typewriter, the narrow strip that spends its whole life shuttling between 2 spools like a commuter who never quite arrives, could summon metallurgists to argue over cloth weave. Density coax postal clerks to weigh consonants on apothecary scales, and ignite a politely baffling fashion for lavender-scented carbon ink laid only on ribbons exactly 13 millimeters wide. Yet here we are, drifting through the unhurried. Chronicle of typewriter ribbon widths. If you're still awake by the time of Barcelona, telegraphist size that 12.7 millimeters lets the letter M stretch its legs without stepping on margins. Feel free to subscribe or simply lean back. Ribbons will keep inching. Spoolward long after audiences have turned to dreams, the hum begins in 1868, when Scholl's and Glidden's early machine rattles across a Milwaukee workbench. Its ribbon is a remnant from ladies' hat trim, 7/8 of an inch wide, because that was the only bolt of inkable silk the inventor's cousin could spare. When steel type slaps at vowels, ink splatters a polite oval wide enough that stray serifs land with room to spare. Clerks copy invoices, notice that the ribbon's generous breadth spares them tinkering with alignment, and decide abundance feels civilized. Yet silk frays, leaving filaments that tickle pivot bars. Engineers respond by hemming edges with beeswax, shrinking effective width to an accidental 21 millimeters. Across the Atlantic, calligraph models in London boast cotton ribbons dyed aniline black. A factory foreman, proud of decimals, slices bolts to 20 millimeters even, aligning his shear blades with the brass ruler soldered to his tea tray. Salesmen claim the round number improves lash tension. Typists merely appreciate that narrower. Cloth costs a trifle less, stretching budgets toward mid-morning buns. One micro hook wanders by every 30 seconds. A ledger clerk logs ribbon length against letter count, discovers 20 millimeter stock endures 7% longer than 21, because less edge fray means fewer pauses for ribbon reversal. He sends the memo to management, who promptly adopt 19.5 to shave further costs. Mathematics, like pastry crumbs, can be nudged by appetite dot by 1890. Underwood introduces the front straight carriage and settles on half-inch, 12.7 millimeters. Ribbons, after discovering the hammer basket's strike surface, is happiest when ink-field. Matches exactly 4 pica widths. Designers draft a tidy circle of logic. Half-inch equals 4 picas equal aesthetic solace. Stationery catalogs trumpet standard half-inch ribbon except no other, while Remington protective. Of its 20 millimeter legacy, prints pamphlets warning that narrower cloth smudges ascenders. In truth, smudges originate from over-oiled bearings, but fear travels quicker than facts. So offices split into 2 camps, half-inch modernists versus vintage 3/4 loyalists. Lengthy memos ask which width best complements a semicolon. Answers typically reference office tradition or the boss's preferred waistcoat stripe. Proving data rarely outshines habit. Scene 2 unfurls under arc lamp glare of telegraph halls. Operators coveted carbon copies. Each strike must sing through 3 layers like a pebble skipping tranquil water. Experiments reveal 12 millimeter two-tone ribbons, black upper half, red lower thread more easily past color selector. Levers. The dividing horizon rests at precisely 6 millimeters, a number immortalized in tiny diagrams taped above every Texas Western Union machine. One night, aboard Kyre in El Paso measures temperature effect on dye and observes red stripes expand by a hair in summer, shrinking black to 5.8 millimeters. He writes that the ribbon breathes between telegrams, a phrase preserved only because a supervisor found it poetic and copied it onto a warehouse chalkboard, where replacement crews misread it as an official humidity warning for decades thereafter. World War I requisitions cotton and prompts rayon experimentation. Rayon refuses half-inch loyalty. Its slick fibers wander off-center, causing ink pockets to gather in unexpected whirls. Engineers discover stability if width rises to 13 millimeters, exactly the span between ball bearings on the winding arbor. The U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps therefore orders 13 millimeters olive drab ribbons for field typewriters, citing tactical opacity. Soldiers report the cloth doubles as emergency shoelace. The makeshift laces prove just long enough for ankle. Boots permanently tethering 13 millimeters to notions of rugged adequacy. Between wars, secretarial schools bloom, clacking in syncopated chorales. Instructors preach ribbon economy, reverse spools at first sign of fade, store cloth in tin to deter toothy mice, choose width by document dignity. Personal letters may enjoy 11 millimeter amateur reels sold cheaply in dime stores. Wills and property deeds command 30 millimeter registrar grade impregnated with India, ink rumored to resist 3 floods and 1 polite fire. A Boston stenographer tests this claim by boiling a scrap alongside potatoes' ink dolls, but survives, unlike the potatoes. She writes an amused note in the margin and returns to teaching shorthand loops that themselves measure scarcely 2 millimeters high. Evidence that ribbon with dwarfs handwriting worries. Scene 3 creaks into the fluorescent 60s. Nylon arrives, boasting tensile strength that laughs at breakage stats. Cartridge ribbons snap into cassettes shaped like modest hurricanes. Design patents choose 14 millimeters, so feed rollers can embed small notches that click audibly when nearing end. The click offers typists a soft countdown to panic. Office comedians discover inserting half-inch ribbon into 14 millimeter cassette yields a jaunty ruffle edge that prints zebra fringes. This accidental art decorates inter-office memos until maintenance confiscates all mismatched supplies under the Uniform Appearance Directive, a title even duller than the memos it helps to rescue. Electronic daisy wheels were onto desks, carrying 25 millimeter fabric loops because impact pins crave broader targets. Veterans grumble about acreage. Plastic spools resemble donuts, clumsy in drawers once tailored for slender half-inch reels. Yet the print looks crisp, and secretary's note broader band means longer printing life ink reservoir scaled in soothing percentages. For a fleeting moment, width inflation seems inevitable. Then inkjet silence oozes into cubicles, and ribbons retreat like tide from a newly calm shore. Laptop screens promise paperless Eden, but accountants still sign triplicate forms, and shops still swipe carbonless credit slips. Ribbon factories downsize to 2 flagship widths, 13 millimeters for collectors refurbishing war-era portables, and 12.7 millimeters for everyone embracing that half-inch feels right in the soul, even if conversion charts insist decimals. ISO steps quietly with standard 12.7 millimeters plus or minus 0.2, referencing pica legend and spool tolerances. The document includes an optional note. Legacy 13 millimeters ribbon acceptable where war model compatibility required. A sentence that reads like, permission for nostalgia to keep tinkering.scene for floats beneath today's LED desk lamp where your grandfather's Olivetti might lounge. ribbon smelling faintly of machinist oil and forgotten adjectives. New boutique suppliers weave ribbons from bamboo cornflower blend, still at 12.7 millimeters because vintage spools haven't widened since disco. They dye half the batch teal, the other half twilight purple. Forums debate whether teal ink guards against photocopier glare. Someone 3D prints a spool extender allowing 14 millimeter cloth in half-inch machines. Results range from splendid to splattered, depending on faith and friction. Meanwhile, one minimalist coder writes a program to emulate typewriter ding at line end. Ribbon width becomes intangible, measured only in pixels, yet the software still best. Displays half-inch reel inserted, as though ghosts of cloth carry weight and binary dot, pick up any forgotten typewriter. Ribbon tin from a flea market shelf. Turn it in your hand. Perhaps the label boasts half INCH 20 yards extra black. Perhaps it claims 30 millimeters were grade guaranteed legible under dust. Slide a finger along spool rim. Feel the gentle rise echoing each word. That once stamped trust onto telegrams, invoices, love letters. Inhale, there's that faint blend of ink, starch, and time. Exhale, letting the scent settle like paragraph indent. Again, breathe with the rhythm a ribbon still practices inside its dark cassette advance. Imprint, pause, reverse, repeat until your thoughts, too, parade on fabric, then fade, quiet as carbon that has given every whisper it knew. Should dreams spool Mal, may they unroll at just the right width, not too bold, not too faint, exactly wide enough to carry one more sleeping sentence before dawn returns to insert the next blank reel. You might not expect that the modest legs of a desk stapler, the twin prongs that dive through paper like bashful swimmers, only to bend back and synchronized. Surrender could gather blacksmiths around ambles, lure municipal clerks into counting, fold angles by candlelight, and kindle one fleeting craze for mint-scented copper staples trimmed exactly 6 millimeters long. Yet here we are, drifting through the slow, oddly shiny chronicle of staple leg length. If you're still awake by the time a Venetian notary remarks that 5 millimeters hold convictions without pinching egos, feel free to subscribe or simply rest. Those slender tines will keep folding whether or not an audience tallies. They're piercings. The first scene wrestles into view in a 17th century French court, where royal decrees sprout wax seals like crimson mushrooms. Couriers complain about brittle seals snapping on horseback, so a royal armorer hammers tiny, U-shaped copper nails that can be hammered through parchment corners and folded flat on the back part of staples. Really, lengths guessed at by the distance between thumb knuckle and quill nib, roughly 8 millimeters if you flatten the curve. Records note that the armorer insists on half a palace because it sounds poetic in front of chamberlains. Unfortunately, copper is soft, pages swivel loose, and one decree flutters free into a gutter, prompting a discreet search party, and the first memo suggesting a shorter, stiffer pen. By the next harvest, the armorer trims to 7 millimeters, hardens copper in vinegar brine, and boasts of imperial bite, an advertisement that survives only because someone doodled a tiny crown above the phrase before nodding off. Industrial. Murmurs follow when Victorian clerks, drowning beneath railway receipts, seek faster fastening than ribbon ties. A Glasgow engineer patents the McGill single-shot stapler in 1866, cutting brass wire to resist daily thunderclaps of leverage. He settles on 9 millimeter legs, not from calculation, but because the wire-cutting die jams any shorter. Print houses adore the hold on 50-sheet booklets, whose secretaries grumble the legs, poke fingers when pages are flicked. 1. Micro hook glides by. A Brighton bookkeeper measures blood spots on ledgers and correlates their frequency with staple length. His chart peaks at 9, dips at 8, and quietly vanishes after the office cat knocks the inkwell sideways, possibly in solidarity with shorter staples. seeing two thuds into the 20th century, where American factories unleashed the swing line. Open channel stapler. Its designers crunch numbers on slide rules, lubricated by optimism, announcing the Goldilocks length, 6.35 millimeters, an exact quarter inch, long enough to clasp, short enough to cuddle, according to brochures. Printed in lobelia blue. Typists applaud fewer finger scrapes. Maintenance applauds cheaper wire. European manufacturers respond by rounding to 6 millimeters, even metric elegance. Fewer decimals, lower tariffs on wire imports measured by meters. For a decade, offices split like a picnic cake, quarter inch on one side of the Atlantic, 6 millimeter on the other. Each camp convinced the rival leg either overreaches or underachieves. Trade journals stage polite debates comparing clinch angles. Too long and prongs overlap like embarrassed limbs. Too short and they flare into snagging hooks. In practice, both hold 5 sheets fine, 12 sheets sometimes, and 20 sheets. Only if rivalry isn't watching Delt World War II Titans metal belts. Staple factories switch from coppery brass to high-carbon steel, then to zinc-coated low-carbon wire to save alloying costs. Harder wire punctures paper with sharper pride, allowing length to shrink without surrendering grip. Quarter-inch contracts to 6 even across rationed boardrooms, while Soviet models embrace 5.8 because their metric slide gauges already carried that notch for ammunition belts. Propaganda posters inadvertently celebrate staple. Legs when illustrating orderly paperwork, the prongs resembling chevrons marching across margins. In Siberian cold tests, inspectors observe 5.8 millimeters snap fewer frost brittle bends than 6, though they quietly admit most offices remain warmer than the test shed. Peace returns with fluorescent lighting and stapler. Companies pivot to aesthetic whispers, pastel casings, chrome levers, scented staples. A Tokyo stationery firm dips prongs in mint oil, arguing the aroma refreshes productivity. Mint oil thickens zinc coating, nudging length back up to 6.3 so clinchers fold without cracking sweetened shells. Office gossip claims mice nibble mint tips, though actual culprits are interns pocketing ribboned bundles for novelty. The fad dissolves once accountants tally fragrance costs, yet the 6+ leg survives, proving once again that length lags behind perfume like a polite afterthought. Personal computing tiptoes in, promising paperless miracles but dot matrix. Invoices keep clattering and staplers keep slapping. High-speed models emerge with flat fold technology, compressing prongs into paper rather than curling. Engineers discover flat forms thrive on slightly longer legs, 7 millimeters, because metal must travel farther before flattening flush. Pilot studies show binders store flat fold stacks 30% thinner, an irresistible metric for archives gasping under their own gravity. Still, classic curl-back staples cling to 6 in cubicles where habits print louder than memos. Scene. 3 hums beneath the tap of human factors consultants clicking clipboards. They film volunteers staple at varying lengths, tracking wrist torque and jaw tension. Graphs reveal subjective satisfaction peaks around 6.2 millimeters, almost exactly the midpoint of the Atlantic Divide. One researcher theorizes a subconscious recognition of the golden ratio between prong length and paper thickness, but reviewers, yawning, request fewer metaphysics and more charts. Meanwhile, schools adopt color-coded staples, red for corrections, green for praise. Color film requires polymer coatings, which add a hair of thickness. Factories compensate by shaving metal length to 5.9. Teachers, oblivious, report that red staples feel less severe when shorter, though students likely credit gentler comments. Not decimals. Eco designers in the 2010s lament that 2 prongs per document equals twice the metal, so they invent the single leg. Staple, V-shaped but one arm trimmed. It must be 7 millimeters to pierce and fold safely, sliding diagonally through corners. Reviews call it vaguely avant-garde, but jam-prone. Sails flutter and roost. Meanwhile, Zara staple punches cut clever slits that tuck paper into paper. Yet, ironically, marketing inserts still arrive stapled with traditional 6mm legs, proving negation sells best pinned to evidence of what it negates. ISO Technical Committee 22 finally publishes guidance. Common Office. Staples, leg length 6mm plus or minus 0.2. Heavy duty flat fold 7mm plus or minus 0.3. Archival copper 8mm optional for humidity extremes. The document's NX notes 1/4 inch legacy accepted where nostalgia dictates. Few read beyond the summary, but the numbers filter into procurement software and warehouses recalibrate pallets. A Swiss librarian measuring staples across centuries lines them on velvet, each bent like tiny as an insect limb, and realizes their inching history resembles tree rings growth. Drought, growth, drought cycling toward an asymptote of good enough. You may cradle a stapled packet, now pay stubs, grocery flyers, an old takeout menu. Press the cool crown, tug gently. Feel the prongs hugging pages in clinched choreography. Perhaps they extend a neat 6mm, perhaps a brave 7. Perhaps a heritage 1/4 inch still clinging to fractions. Trace one prong's journey, puncture, tunnel, bend, rest, a life measured in millimeters and silent duty. Inhale as though metal slips through pulp. Exhale as arms fold home again and again, until breath follows the clamp steady pressure, decisive curl, calm embrace. Soon numbers fade, ink relaxes, and the tail of tiny lengths flutters closed, like paper settling in a drawer after hours. Dream knowing that somewhere a spool of wire still unwinds to the next measured segment, ready to pierce tomorrow's murmuring paperwork while you, at last, lie quietly unfastened. You might not expect that the gentle give of a pencil eraser, the mild squish heard only by attentive fingertips, could coax vulcanizers into whispering fractions of sulfur, persuade census clerks to time their errors with pocket watches, and inspire one mercifully brief season of chamomile-scented rubbers, calibrated to exactly 42 sure, a hardness. Yet here we are, meandering through the soft, oddly crumbly chronicle of eraser firmness. If you're still awake by the time a Vienna bookkeeper assures us that 38 sure forgives miscalculations without erasing your self-esteem, feel free to subscribe, or simply settle back. The eraser will keep yielding too. Graphite long after eyelids lower their shades. In the beginning, there was bread, specifically yesterday's crumb, pinched into a pliant wad and dabbed on smudged ledgers with sacerdotal patience. Bakers never intended their loaves for arithmetic redemption, yet account books from 1710 London bear marginal notes such as used 1 penny loaf to rescue 2 shillings worth of sums, proving economics can taste faintly of rye. Stale crumb registers by modern durometer, somewhere around 5 sure oxygen monoxide, so soft that merely breathing on it might count as pressure. Clerks enjoyed the tenderness until mice learned subtraction tasted delicious. Thus the bread era crumbled, literally, beneath gnaw marks and weasel-thin losses. Enter Joseph Priestley in 1770, who notices a chunk of raw India rubber lifting pencil traces from paper like polite magic. The sample, unvulcanized and tacky, clocks near 20 short A, firm enough to survive a squeeze, yielding enough to caress cotton rag folios. Stationers carve cubes, wrap them in delicate silk paper, and warn customers to store rubbers in. Tins less summer heat melt remorse into sticky puddles. Even so, poets keep them close, describing the scent faintly botanical, definitely adventurous, as if each syllable might take itself less seriously after a brief polish of rubber forgiveness. 19th century dawns, and Charles Goodyear's vulcanization process stiffens rubber's resolve. He tweaks sulfur ratios, testing firmness by pressing a brass thimble into sample cakes and noting depth. Anecdote says his favorite hardness, about 34 Shore A, matched the indentation left by his youngest child's thumb when, asking for another story, Goodyear brands that softness just right, and manufacturers adopted as grade 2 writing rubber. For school slates, however, teachers request crisper bite to scour graphite from cheap wood pulp, which bruises easily. Toolmakers respond with 41 Shore Slate Special, harder and squeakier, notorious for raising chalk dust halos around every erased lead. A micro hook drifts by. In 1889, a Chicago school inspector counts squeaks per multiplication. Tests and concludes that harder erasers add 4 minutes to exam times through acoustic distraction alone. The note survives in municipal archives, smudged as if the page itself protested. 20th century mechanization rolls erasers into tidy cylinders, crowned by brass ferrules on yellow no, 2 pencils. The first batch, made of soft Japan gum, tests at 38 Shore. Students find that too soft after early autumn humidity congeals graphite into stubborn shadows. Factories tighten recipes to 40. This modest shift spawns decades of brand slogans. Firmer focus, exact pressure. Errors flee at 40, all hawking variations separated by margins smaller than the thickness of a fingernail. Quipping. During World War II, synthetic styrene butadiene rubber replaces natural stock. Engineers, chasing uniform crumbs, discover that a trace of zinc oxide nudges hardness down to 36 while boosting snowy whiteness. Pleasing vanity that leads stationery catalogs to promise clean erasure, no ghosting. Post-war, children test the claim by drawing mustaches on presidents in textbooks and giggling when pale shadows remain. Proof that viscosity and mischief share similar half-lives. Scene 2 settles in fluorescent accounting offices where rotary adding. Machines clatter. Here, ledger paper likes erasers soft enough not to polish columns, but firm enough to withstand bursts of frustration. Supply managers therefore order 39 Shore ledger blocks, tinted salmon pink, so lost among white forms, they reappear before month end. Clerks develop thumb calluses shaped like truncated pyramids, silent testimonials to daily rub and tally rituals. One restless auditor measures crumb yield per erasure stroke, compiling a chart that resembles snowfall predictions. He notes that every point increase above 40 reduces crumb volume by 8%, turning errors to dustless smears. The chart gains brief fame before disappearing beneath new stationery orders heavier than regret. Meanwhile, artists rebel against hardness in the 1960s, craving needed erasers near 10 Shore OO, stretchable like dough, yet brave enough to lift charcoal from toothy rag. Conservators whisper warnings. Needed rubbers, left unattended, crawl toward lamp bases under their own soft well, collecting lint kingdoms. Nevertheless, galleries maintain bowls of them, gray nuggets absorbing more gossip than graphite. The era also births the vinyl eraser polyvinyl chloride, plasticized into 30 Shore-ish grace, sliding across Bristol board like a skate blade on pond ice. Chemists add titanium dioxide for opacity. Marketing dubs it Snow White, promising. Paper purity. Secretly, the compound sits just a hair softer than traditional 40, tickling artists into loyalty by the nudge of 2 Shore points. Scene 3 astronauts float into. NASA needs pens that work upside down, but they still pack pencils for backup. Engineers fear eraser crumbs becoming rogue satellites inside spacecraft, so they specify firm 70 Shore caps, nearly wagon wheel tough, the idea being crumb generation drops as hardness climbs. Astronauts later report the erasers feel like rubbing the mistake with Mars itself, yet they do the job, leaving barely a whisper on checklist carbon. Space diaries reveal most errors were self-correcting anyway, thanks to Velcro labels ready to peel and paste over wayward digits. Back on Earth, novelty shops copy the NASA spec, selling space-grade rubbers at craft fairs. Children complain their math homework now smells of burnt plastic and requires elbow grease. So the fad descends quicker than a gravity well-docked digital whispers hum, promising keyboards will exile graphite. Yet puzzle makers still love crosswords, and exam halls continue distributing HB pencils. Modern factories standardize on 37 Shore EVA, ethylene vinyl acetate, composites latex-free, hypoallergenic, crumb tuned to tumble in larger rolls that custodians sweep with one generous pass. ISO guidelines frame acceptable firmness as 34 to 40 for general writing, 25 to 32 for art, 41 to 45 for registry grade. The annex notes that anything harder risks bruising cellulose, and anything softer leaves smudge ghosts as sleepy specters of errors past. Manufacturers obey with zen-like calm, calibrating rollers, trimming blocks to symmetrical parallelepipes that look ready to build tiny marble temples to second chances. The final scene glows beneath. LED desk lamps were bullet journaling. Enthusiasts test pastel-scented eraser sets, lavender at 35, mint at 36, vanilla at 37 differences, too slight for durometer needles, yet enough for marketing haikus. Some enthusiasts freeze rubbers overnight to achieve crisp erasure lines during morning doodles. Others microwave them for pliant blending effects. Internet forums chart anecdotal shore shifts with the seriousness of climatology. Amid this chatter, vintage collectors rescue bread erasers from museum archives, measuring their give with electronic probes the bakers never dreamed of. Findings: staleness calcifies crumb to 12 short A, yet still, if dabbed gently, lifts centuries-old graphite like lifting a polite secret. Hold a pencil now if one lingers near. Tap the eraser against a page. Feel its mild spring somewhere. Between dough and doorstop, maybe 38, maybe 40, maybe the lunar surface 70 of a novelty store. Trace a light mark, then set the eraser atop it. Press, twist, lift. Watch graphite scatter to faint gray snow. Inhale the faint scent rubber, clay, perhaps a ghost of chamomile if marketing had its way. Exhale slowly, allowing breath to match. Pressure, gentle, steady, nothing drastic. Again press, twist, lift air softens, crumb gathers, paper forgives. Breathe along every measured shore point, and notice how even the firmest eraser still yields, just enough each time it rescues. A wandering line. Soon the need to repair fades, sentences settle, and you drift, like pale crumbs to a desk corner, calm in the knowledge that whatever firmness tomorrow brings 40, 38, or quietly malleable 10-second chances will arrive trimmed to size, ready to hush mistakes with the softest necessary touch. You might not expect that the quiet length of a tea bag string the frail tether. Suspending a small pouch of leaves in morning calm could draw loom fitters into arguing about cotton twist, persuade railway porters to time dunk intervals. By elbow height, and spark one fleeting vogue for bergamot-scented tags tied precisely 18 centimeters from the staple. Yet here we are, drifting through the unhurried chronicle of teabag string length. If you're still awake by the time a Devonshire grocer confides that 16 centimeters lets scandal steep but never boil, feel free to subscribe or simply allow your spoon to idle. The string will dangle patiently, steeping whether or not anyone tallies your yawns. It begins in 1908, when New York merchant Thomas Sullivan sends silk sample sachets of tea to customers and forgets to include instructions. Patrons dunk the sachets whole, pulling them out with hat pins, measured only by whim. Sullivan notes their improvisations and ties a soft cotton thread 10 inches, or roughly 25 centimeters, because that is the span between his thumb and the corner of his workbench. Early adopters call the length generous. though one seamstress complains the tail slaps her spectacles during vigorous stirs. She knots a loop halfway, inventing the first informal adjuster. Sullivan's accountant records that longer strings boost sales of taller mugs. Correlation is mistaken for destiny, and the 10-inch standard drifts across Atlantic catalogs like steam across a harbor. Across the channel, Lyons and Company seek thrift. Their machinist, fond of tidy circles, wraps thread around a dowel 3 times and sips 15 centimeters. He argues shorter cords save 3 miles of cotton per million bags, enough to stitch a polite grin across the finance director's ledger. London clerks adopt the stubby length. Colonial planters protest, claiming tropical teacups are wider, demanding 18. A compromise settles at 16, printed on packing slips in serif type that somehow tastes of empire. 1 micro hook glides by every half minute. A clerk at Tilbury Docks tests tensile strength by hanging halfpenny coins from tags. He finds the string snaps at 23 coins, jots a note, then spends the halfpennies on kippers, thereby closing a loop. Neither scientific nor circular, World War II rationing tightens thread supplies. British factories splice linen with rayon. Discovering rayon shrinks 2% in boiling water, tugging tags dangerously close to scalding meniscus. Engineers lengthen cords by 1 centimeter to compensate. Ration boards object until reminded that shorter tags might scald typists typing very important memos. The extra centimeter survives the war, camouflaged beneath victory banners. Meanwhile, American G is stationed posted in Italy jury-rigged coffee filters from surplus tea bags, trimming strings to 12 centimeters so they tuck beneath helmet brims while marching. Field manuals briefly list string beverage extraction, short under consumables, then drop the line when nobody figures out how to requisition a cord that already comes. Attached to leisure, peace returns with fluorescent kitchens. Automatic vending urns appear in railway buffets, dispensing water from spigots high enough to drown long strings. Designers draft a 20-centimeter safety length and add weighted cardboard tags stamped with moral aphorisms. Think before you sip. Commuters swipe the tags as bookmarks. Trains collect fewer lost tickets. The bookmarks apparently moonlight as placeholders for receipts, postcards, and occasional heartsick doodles. Psychologists study why commuters favor 20/16, concluding that a longer string grants ceremonious flourish, like pulling open velvet curtains on a small boiling stage. The paper publishes in a journal shelved beside ticket punch maintenance guides. Both gather dust in equal measure. Scene slows beneath late-night dormitory. Lamps where students brew instant noodles with tea bags floating sentinel. They knot 2 bags together, creating 30-centimeter garlands that dangle from bunk frames while cramming entropy equations. Someone times steeping by counting ceiling tile seams. Numbers blur politely into caffeine haze. Manufacturers spy opportunity and introduce twin drop. Bags tied end to end at 28 centimeters for pitchers meant to serenade seminars. Focus groups cherish the novelty. Warehouses detest tangled skeins. Within a fiscal quarter, the model retires to clearance aisles, remembered only by thrift shop mugs still wearing. Skeletal strings like faded party streamers dot as the wellness wave of the 1990s curls. Herbal brands tout mindfulness in millimeters. One releases chamomile tags lithographed with yoga poses, string measured to match average adult sternum height 17 centimeters, so tag rests over the heart during inhalation. Marketing calls it breath-aligned brewing. Sales surge among catalog readers, though customer service logs reveal frequent complaints about tags dipping into honeypots. The company counters by laminating tags in beeswax film, which smells lovely but sticks to saucer rims, and the world moves on. Moderately calmer, yet none the wiser regarding length. Aerospace engineers enter the saga. When zero-gravity tea experiments aboard Mir require strings with no loose ends, they cut Kevlar microbraid to 14 centimeters, sew Velcro nibs to tags, and affix them to mug collars so nothing floats away mid-steep. Astronaut diaries mention the strings behave like disciplined snakes, coiling lung forces unseen. Back on Earth, a Portland cafe markets cosmonaut tea with Velcro dots and 14-centimeter cords dyed cosmic indigo. Regulars find the brew pleasant, though the Velcro grabs knit scarves. Cords quietly lengthen back to 16 in subsequent shipments without cosmic fanfare. Digital kettles blink into kitchens, promising smartphone-timed infusions. Their instruction leaflets recommend 19-centimeter strings for optimal QR code scanning on tags. Block reviewers measure and debate. 19 dangles elegantly in mason jars, but slaps tablet screens when selfies occur. A minimalist movement responds with tagless bags and silicone tongs string length 0. Traditionalists cling to the mid-teens, citing the solemn joy of fishing a bobbing thought from porcelain using only thumb, index finger, and the small leap of faith.iss eventually sips its way into the debate. Producing guidance: 15 centimeters plus or minus 2 for cups under 300 milliliters, 17 centimeters plus or minus 2 for mugs, 20 centimeters for ceremonial pots, with annex notes permitting historic replique exceeding 25 centimeters. Few read the PDF. Most manufacturers already default to 16 because machines were too expensive to recalibrate after the 1960s. Somewhere in a Kyoto workshop, artisans weave silk strings exactly 18 because local plum blossoms measure that when paired. End, and symbolism tastes sweeter than standards. Lift your current cup if one lingers nearby. Gaze at its string resting against the porcelain like a very thin bookmark between chapters of steam. Perhaps it measures a modest 16 centimeters, the silent norm. Maybe 18, offering slack for dramatic dunking. Maybe 14, reminiscent of spacefaring patience. Gently twirl it between fingers, feeling the tension translate heartbeat into ripples. Notice how each centimeter carries decisions of spinning frames, sulfur baths, warboards, yoga marketers, and cosmic curiosity, all condensed into a thread humble enough to retreat into a teaspoon's shadow. Inhale the curling aroma above. Exhale, watching the tag float back, steady as a metronome marking the tempo of unhurried evenings. Repeat inhale, exhale, string rising, string settling until kettle hiss becomes shoreline hush and thoughts steep down to pale months of calm. Should dreams drift over during this quiet infusion, may they arrive tethered by exactly enough length. No tug, no slack, just the patient line between waking and rest, ready to lift softly when a new dawn asks politely for another cup. You might not expect that the modest protrusion of a file folder tab, the tiny cardboard, peninsula poking above Manila calm, could summon cartographers to debate compass fractions, coax county clerks to count gossip by millimeters and Kindle. One brief vogue for lavender-scented end taps trimmed exactly 1 1/4 inches wide. Yet here we are, drifting through the quietly offset chronicle of tab placement. If you're still awake by the time a Halifax archivist murmurs that a 1/3 cut leaves breathing room for secrets, feel free to subscribe or simply lean back. The tabs will keep jutting politely, whether or not an audience alphabetizes your dreams. The first rustle begins in 1895, when an Indiana stationery salesman named Edwin G. Filing explores the exasperating pile of flat-topped folders sliding like pancakes across courthouse desks. Swamped clerks fold corner dog ears as impromptu flags. Edwin, observing one frazzled deputy tower pages high, snips a half-moon notch from a stray cover, an act measured not by ruler but by impatience. He flips the notch upward and scribbles land in pencil. The deputy exhales as though someone opened a window in a paper maze. Edwin trims a second folder, this time at the center, and a third on the far side, accidentally inventing the first 1/3 cut, set purely because scissors favored 3 quick bites before dulling. Length, about 4 centimeters wide, because that matched the width of his penmanship when he wrote taxes in block letters. No patent, yet just whispers of relief migrating down county corridors. Across the Atlantic, a London law firm adopts imported Edwin-style folders, but complains their shelves prefer symmetry. Notches must align like choristers. Their printer proposes 5 positions instead of 3 far left. Midway left, center, midway right, far right arguing 5 notes make finer music than 3. Tabs shrink to 1 inch to fit tighter cadence, and the practice earns the nickname concert cut. 1 microhook slides by every half minute. A junior solicitor claims he can predict case outcomes by tab placement. Far right tabs herald contentious divorces. Center tabs calm estates. No one believes him, but everyone peeks when new files arrive, just in case cardboard knows more than precedent. Early 20th century factories embrace die punch rollers that rhythmically chop manila like metronomes. Engineers discover the punch teeth warp less if tabs measure exactly 1/2 inch in height. Taller tabs curl when humidity swells fibers. Thus the modern tab rises 13 millimeters above the folder roof, a figure chosen by steam, not statute. Machinery loves repetition, so production lines fix on 3 position cycles for US markets, 5 position for Britain, and A. Curious 4 position quarter cut, promoted briefly in New Zealand because someone misread a telegram comma. Librarians adopt all variants, stacking shelves like patchwork quilts. One cataloger even scores shelf life by tab syncopation, misaligned rows invite visual turbulence, and, allegedly, Dust.Scene glides into fluorescent 1940s offices where wartime rationing bleaches manila to the pallor of quiet worry. To save pulp, tab width narrows to 7/8 of an inch. Government circulars declare narrow cuts patriotic. Posters show smiling secretaries saluting tidy drawers. Yet inspectors note hand cramps as clerks write abbreviations smaller. Someone invents self-adhesive labels, each 19 millimeters high, overshadowing the skinny tab like a hat brim. The solution solves cramp, but revives pulp use. Delicious irony noted only in a footnote to a memo nobody stamps. Piece brings color. Coal tar dyes birth saffron, salmon, mint. A Boston supply house offers rainbow runs, claiming color plus tab. Position yields 54 indexing combinations, enough for every faint desire of bureaucracy. Hospitals pick pink for pediatrics, green for geriatrics. Auditors choose red for payroll, blue for lulled budgets. Yet too much color startles accountants, so width quietly widens back to 1 inch, giving ink more room to breathe. Meanwhile, an Albuquerque insurance firm experiments with diagonal tabs shaved from front edge inward, angled for ambition. Clerks report paper cuts shaped like lightning bolts. Diagonal fad fades by next fiscal quarter, though not before someone frames a jagged specimen as motivational art reading "Make sharp choices." Scene 3 taps typewriter cadence in the 1960s when carbonless forms burst drawers at double tempo. Tab real estate crowds. Designers split the 1/3 into 2 smaller stubs, birthing 1/6 cut tabs only 2 centimeters wide, just enough to host 3 letters and an ellipsis. Marketing dubs them whisper tabs, for they bleed no secrets at a glance. Secretaries gripe that whisper tabs bend, tearing at faintest sigh. Stapler jaws chew their slender necks. By 1972, most whisper sets retreat to clearance bins, though collectors later cherish their shy profiles like stamps, computers promise. Folderless nirvana, yet printers disgorge spreadsheets in thicker reams. Filing cabinets swell into beige cuboid forests. ISO convenes, recommending tab heights of 12 to 13 millimeters, widths variable, 1/3 cut at 90 millimeters, 1/5 cut at 50 millimeters, 1/6 cut at 38 millimeters. NXB allows 1/2 cut for high visibility routing. Few read the PDF. Manufacturers already build dies to those sizes for market osmosis. However, Japanese stationery artisans, entranced by golden proportions, craft 89 millimeters tab's tiniest defiance, clutched by design students who measure harmony in decimals. Blogs rave for one season until shipping fees hush admiration. Final scene. Settles beneath LED desk lamps where bullet journalers repurpose classic folders into dividers trimmed by craft knives. They position tabs at irregular intervals they nickname constellations, claiming the eye size happily when patterns evade symmetry. Tab width returns to whim. Some sprawl entire folder tops like parade floats, others shrink to chic slivers. Hosting single icons, moon, leaf, coffee cup drawn, and metallic gel pen. Archivists witnessing this renaissance smile privately, reminded that every standard one day invites rebellion soft as a paper rustle. Reach for any folder if one lounges. Mirror. Stroke its tab edge, perhaps broad 1/3, perhaps slender 1/5, maybe whispered 1/6 rescued from an old audit. Feel fibers firm yet yielding, shaped by steel chompers and century-old tugs between economy and clarity. Inhale. The faint vanilla of aged cellulose. Exhale, watching fingertips slide from tab to spine, again, until breath aligns with the silent parade of categories marching beneath cardboard caps. Should eyelids fold now, may dreams file themselves gently urgent matters under far left, wanderings under center, hopes under far right, each in a drawer that closes with a hush softer than any stamp of finality, leaving you alphabetized in calm until dawn slips its own label beneath the day. You might not expect that the diameter of a paperclip's wire, the modest girth silently circling memos and grocery lists alike, could entice metallurgists to weigh purity by the whisker, coax shipping clerks to tune pocket scales with, size and spark one short-lived fad for peppermint oil clips wound exactly 9/10 of a millimeter thick. Yet here we are, drifting through the quiet, shiny chronicle of paper clip wire gauge. If you're still awake by the time a Copenhagen archivist notes that 8/10 of a millimeter presses pages close but never bruises their feelings, feel free to subscribe or simply loosen your grip. The wire will keep looping. Mistake after mistake, long after eyelids fold into dusk. The story bends into shape in 1867, when a Norwegian inventor named Johan Valler twists the length of no 18 iron fence wire around a dowel, making 2 proud loops because 3 would have clattered off his workbench. No, 18. And his shed measures roughly 1.2 millimeters, the width of his wife's knitting needle, borrowed without announcement. Early adopters admire the clip's resolve, sturdy enough to clutch parchment deeds, pliant enough to be pried open with fingernails unbroken. Yet telegraph clerks complain the clip chews flimsy message sheets like a goat nibbling lettuce. Valler trims prototypes with a file, shaving the wire by what he later calls 2 rasp songs, bringing diameter to 1 millimeter neat. A ledger dated 1870 shows in tidy script, wire-paired ink smiles. The note survives in Oslo's patent. Museum with a paperclip attached, still showing faint fang marks, hinting at the romance between ambition and abrasion. Across the Atlantic, gem manufacturing in Britain crafts a rival clip by winding music box spring steel around a cone mandrel. They choose no 20 gauge 0.9 millimeters because the spring coil stock happens to rest at that size in weekday deliveries. Advertisements tout lighter bite, kinder margins. 1 micro hook flutters past. A Birmingham accountant times how long before clip rust discolors ledger edges. Larger gauge invites more iron oxide bloom, so he endorses the slimmer. wire with an affection normally voiced for scones. His memo ripples through Victorian offices, shrinking average wire by a hair and swelling confidence in decimals. Turn-of-the-century mechanization clatters awake. Steel mills groove rods on roller dies, spitting long slender strings like noodles for giants. Engineers debate carbon content with the fervor of poets disputing meter, too soft in loops. Sag open, too hardened coils fracture at second bend. Tests show that 0.95mm high carbon wire survives 4,000 flexes before fatigue murmurs surrender, whereas 0.85mm endures 3,200 but feels gentler on thumbnails. Stationary catalogs split the difference, listing standard gem 0.90mm for general purpose and heavy-duty Viking 1.05mm for legal briefs that refuse diplomacy. A St. Louis courthouse flooded with rival motions, wires for Viking stock, and later boasts its docket weighs half a ton less once filings return sand staples. Whether weight vanished through wire gauge or dry humor remains unclear, but the anecdote endures like a clip clinging to myth. World War I sends nickel to trench radios, leaving paper clips to rust. Factories pivot to blued steel, darker, and slightly thicker 1.0mm to tolerate salt-soaked ledgers in naval stations. Clerks note the midnight hue hides graphite smudges, a cosmetic kindness. Post-war prosperity repaints clips in rainbow vinyl dips. Crimson for invoices, jade for personal, lavender for whenever. The vinyl adds a film just under a tenth of a millimeter, nudging girth to 0.98 while slides still read 0.90. One Boston banker files a warranty claim alleging dishonestly thick paint. The company sends a bouquet-scented apology and 40 extra clips, each dipped in scentless lacquer. Complaint withdrawn, the lavender line fades, leaving only faintly scented rumors in thrift shop desk drawers. Scene drifts into fluorescent. Hush of 1950s corporate towers. Photocopiers spit warm static. Paper mountains grow. Alps. Ergonomists armed with stopwatches measure the fractional second lost when prying heavier gauge. Versus lighter gauge loops. Their charts bloom like sleepy tulips. Productivity peaks at 0.92mm, where pinch force harmonizes with release ease. Purchase departments adopt the 92 rule, ordering by thousand, though suppliers quietly ship 0.94 citing rolling. Tolerance, nobody verifies. Fingers trust muscle memory more than micrometers. A micro hook appears. An Iowa teacher's science fair entry proves children peel 0.88mm. Clips into miniature catapults with greater cheer. The project wins regional because judges secretly adore elasticity demonstrations launching. Spit wads across gymnasiums. Computers glow, promising paperless salvation. Reality replies with more printouts, thicker audit trails, and color graphs mating midair. Manufacturers design jumbo clips from 1.2mm wire to herd stapled bundles. Marketing coins mammoth grip, though secretaries dub it the jaw. ISO committees, sipping mild tea, codify 3 polite categories: light 0.78 to 0.85mm, regular 0.86 to 0.95mm, heavy 0.96 to 1.10mm. Annex C acknowledges legacy Viking width and warns against excessive finger indentation. The document, 117 pages, enjoys brief spotlight before sliding under trays held by regular clips obeying their own bylaws. Eco waves wash ashore. Recycled steel with trace copper gives clips. A warm blush and subtle softness measured at 0.89mm. Ads brag about gentle grip for gentle planet. Skeptics test tensile strength, find it 30 newtons shy, shrug, and order anyway because green sells like cinnamon in winter. Boutique brands braid bamboo fiber round cores, fattening diameter. to 1.05 while promising compostability. Gardeners later discover blossoms sprouting around rusted loops, lending poetry to gauge experiments. Final scene glimmers under LED desk lamps where creative souls bend clips into phone stands, lockpicks, micro-sculptures. Makerspaces favor 0.90 regular stock, flexible, predictable, forgiving of midnight mistakes. College students twist clips into DNA helixes for biology class. Physics clubs fashion bridges over cardboard canyons, calculating load until wire bright with fingerprints yields at 1.01 millimeter span. Blog posts measure office stress by clip mutilation correlating. Dent count with meeting minutes. Upper management reacts by ordering coded 0.87 millimeter models harder to twist. Morale charts remain as curly as discarded coils. Lift any clip within reach. Roll it between fingers, maybe feather, thin 0.8, whispering economy, maybe robust. 1.00 humming security, maybe that elusive 0.92 sweet spot gliding between. Notice the chilled smoothness, the gentle spring, the sense of containment without cage. Inhale the faint metallurgic tang. Exhale as you ease the outer loop open again and again, letting breath follow soft arcs forged in mills, molded by decades of quiet negotiation between pressure and release. Soon the whir of thoughts folds like pages within a measured embrace. Each idea held not too tight, not too loose, exactly the calm span of wire woven through centuries of small decisions curling. Now toward sleep with you, nestled in its modest clasp. You might not expect that the empty silence between two blue lines on a notebook page, the slender band where letters roost, could lure millwrights into polishing brass wheels by candlelight, persuade school inspectors to weigh cursive loops with calipers, and ignite one brief vogue for lavender-scented exercise books ruled exactly 7 millimeters apart. Yet here we are, rambling through the calm, faintly papery chronicle of line spacing. If you're still awake by the time a Dublin headmaster remarks that 8 millimeters gives unconfident G's room to grow tails, feel free to subscribe or simply allow your thoughts to settle. The lines will keep marching, horizon after horizon, long after drowsiness files its attendance card. The first whispers of spacing drift from medieval scriptoria, where monks copy psalms onto vellum stretched tight as winter moonlight. They scratch guidelines with lead point rods, 3 grains of barley apart about 9 millimeters, because barley stores conveniently near the inkhorns and neither argues nor rolls far. Those soft gouges keep minims marching upright. Yet when the abbot suggests doubling lines to save lambskin, scribes protest that cramped vowels snag quill tips like briars on wool. A compromise emerges. 9 stays for choir books whose notes balloon like lanterns. 7 for pocket psalters carried by traveling friars. Nobody measures precisely. They pinch thumbnail gaps in the margins, trusting muscle memory more than numerals. Still, a margin note dated 1278 sighs that 7 leaves the spirit brisk. Faint testimonial that smaller spacing encouraged brisk reading and perhaps quicker napping during sermon. Centuries later, copper plate calligraphers flick steel nibs across laid paper ruled by stationers' apprentices operating creased boxes. These wooden frames drag dull blades through stacked sheets, imprinting grooves to catch ink. Apprentices calibrate distance with twine wound around nails. 2 reps equal 8 millimeters, 3 yield 12. When Spencerian script sweeps 19th century America, penmanship manuals recommend a uniform 3/8 of an inch 9.5 millimeters to cradle flowing capitals that dip like seabirds, then skim upward. Yet telegraph operators learning rapid shorthand crave tighter rails so notes fit one tiny footpad. They slice twine to 7 millimeters and accidentally invent what college students will one day salute as smaller but somehow adult ruling. 1 micro hook glides past every half minute. a Kansas stenographer tests. Legibility by timing how swiftly her eye finds the previous line. She records best speed at exactly 7.1 millimeters and rewards herself with a slice of gooseberry pie, proving Detta pairs sweetly with pastry. Industrial murmurs swell when the 1890s bring the Thomas machine ruler, a steam-fed marvel stamping parallel blue stripes onto reams at 60 sheets a minute. Its inventor sets default spacing to 8 millimeters because the gear ratio of his prototype rounds neatly to that pitch. Orders flow from ledger makers craving consistency, but primary schools, fearing small hands lost in wide blanks, petition for substantial strides between lines. Printers answer with 8.7 millimeters wide rule, quickly dubbed beginner's distance. Textbook margins soon annotate handwriting drills. Copybook A uses wide, copybook B uses narrow. Thus the classroom evolves into a double-spaced society big. Loops for early letters, tighter rails for the ambitious. The silent gap itself becomes curriculum. War-era paper rationing tightens spacing as economies tighten belts. Government forms shrink to 7 millimeter rule to conserve pulp, even though typewriters, with their 10-pitch hearts, prefer 8. Clerks forced to overstrike notice carbon smudges cleanse more easily when lines sit nearer. Perhaps less. Downward pen travel invites a lighter touch. A statistician in Ottawa tabulates ink weight per page. Discovering 7 millimeter spacing saves nearly 1 ounce of ink per 1,000 forms. His finding drifts through ministries like a polite rumor. Within a year, civil service pads shrink accordingly, and the saved ink finances exactly half a snowplow, which nobody names after him. Peace arrives with neon classrooms and ballpoint pens, eager to skate on smooth sulfite. Manufacturers release college wool, 7.1 millimeters framed as intellectual couture. Marketing posters show bespectacled youths wielding logarithms between. Crisp lines, though actual surveys reveal most customers buy whichever pad sits nearest checkout. Still, the size lodges in cultural shorthand. College equals narrow, wide equals grade school. Legal pads float somewhere airy at 8.3 millimeters, letting courtroom notes sprawl like gossip. One sleepy court reporter counts syllables per line and decides. Legal spacing encourages longer adjectives, a theory borne out when transcripts from her stenotype trend wordier on Tuesdays, the day she swaps to college rule for lunch doodles. Scene shifts beneath fluorescent hush of 1980s offices where continuous feed computer paper unfurls like alpine skiing trails. Dot matrix printers spit rows at 6 lines per inch, 4.23 millimeters, dizzying to pen traditionalists. Secretaries. Slide ruler guides beneath green bar stripes to steady handwriting around pixel fonts. Some glue 2 sheets back to back, creating accidental 8.46 millimeters hybrid spacing proof that even mistakes urine symmetry. Meanwhile, loose-leaf makers tempt 3-ring devotees with quad-rule graph paper 5 millimeter squares for math classes. Yet many students flip it sideways, those paragraphs between faint horizontals, composing prose as though hiding in lineated hedgerows. Graph spacing, intended for numbers, accidentally rescues poets fearing wide-open meadows. ISO committees eventually convene, brewing tea over draft 12,857-2, spacing of writing lines on prefabricated stationery. They deem 8 millimeters plus or minus 0.2 general purpose, 7 millimeters plus or minus 0.2 scholastic narrow, 6 millimeters for stenographic special, and nod politely to 5 millimeters grids for technical drawing. An NX recommends pale cyan lines to fade in photocopies. Designers rejoice, printers yawn, students doodle dragons that survive duplication anyway. Still, the documents tables travel into procurement catalogs, and machinery calibrates rollers to decimals once guided by thumbnail lore. Digital notebooks glow, promising pixel sheets adjustable at whim. Yet bullet journal devotees gravitate to dotted grids exactly 5 millimeters apart, praising freedom with faint anchors. Meanwhile, artisan papermakers in Kyoto sell letter. Blocks ruled 8.5 millimeters because brushstrokes thirst for elbow room. None of this contradicts ISO. All breathe quietly beside it, like houseplants beside a grandfather clock. Recently, eco-designers dye rulings in chlorophyll ink that fades under daylight over weeks, leaving blank pages for reuse. The ink's molecules shrink by a micron as they degrade, technically widening spacing in late spring afternoons. Subtle allegory about patience, invisible to all but the most bored microscope. Pick up any notebook resting nearby. Run a fingertip across 2 neighbor lines. Feel the distance, perhaps 7 millimeters, perhaps 8, whispering under skin. The unspoken agreement between velocity of thought and height of loops. Inhale the mellow scent of cellulose and soy ink. Exhale as fingertip drifts downward one interval, again and again, until breath matches the silent cadence rulers etched a century ago. Notice how sentences march yet pause before trespass each. Gap protective as a sleepy mode. Soon phrases ebb, pen lifts, and the lined landscape reclines untouched. Horizons awaiting tomorrow's gentle caravan of vowels. When eyelids slide closed, imagine lines stretching on inside dreams. Evenly spaced, infinitely patient, inviting restless ideas to settle into ordered slumber, each thought tucked precisely 7 or maybe 8 millimeters beneath the one before, stacked like whispers in a library where dawn won't turn the page for hours. You might not expect that the pause between pressing an elevator's close. Door button and the doors actually gliding shut. The tiny stretch where nothing seems to happen at all could lure horologists to chart fractions of seconds. Tempt building inspectors to measure size with stopwatches, and trigger one amusing flurry of peppermint-scented buttons calibrated to delay exactly 2.8 seconds. Yet here we are, drifting through the soft, quietly ticking chronicle of close door delay times. If you're still awake by the time in Minneapolis, Superintendent murmurs that 3 seconds gives friendships enough room to bloom or excuses enough space to fade. Feel free to subscribe or simply lean back. The doors will close obediently, unhurried, whether anyone tallies your blanks. The first hum begins in 1880s Chicago, where steam elevators attend factories like patient iron bellhops. Their folding gates slam shut on rope cues, not buttons, but complaints mount. Gates too quick nip boot heels, gates too slow waste payroll minutes. An engineer named Clarence Dorr sketches a pneumatic damper that inserts pause roughly 2 seconds between lever pull and gate slide, guided only by the time he needs to tug gloves tighter. Workers applaud fewer bruises. Accountants applaud reclaimed seconds. No one measures the interval precisely until a union steward counts hammer strokes on the foundry clock wheel while writing. 7 strokes from pull to close, each stroke about a quarter-second door's inadvertent 1.75 second delay, already softening factory clang. Across the Atlantic, London's department stores unveil electric lifts with brass buttons the size of shillings. Early models wire the close door button directly, doors twitching shut the moment a customer pokes curiosity. Ladies balancing hat boxes protest. Drapery corners catch in panels like gossip in doorway. In 1906, Otis fitters insert relay coils, forcing a 3-second wait, chosen because copper windings they had on hand happened to oscillate at that pace during bench tests. Marketing calls it the courtesy interval. 1 micro hook drifts every minute. A clerk times escalator descent against lift delay, claiming escalator beats elevator for 3 floors unless the close button trims a half-second thus. Begins the eternal escalator wager, revived in shopping centers ever since. Roaring 20s hotels crave swiftness. Bell captains bribe mechanics to shorten pauses. At the Waldorf Astoria, delay dials shrink to 2 seconds, sparking guests' delight but porters' groans when luggage corners click door gaskets. A journalist times celebrity ascents, publishing tables aligning society stature with button. Impatience. The shortest pause, 1.3 seconds, belongs to a silent film star who demands snap. The longest 4 seconds belongs to a novelist who claims ideas slip between door panels if rushed. Readers smile. Engineers recalibrate back to 3 for safety. Still, rumor of the adjustable influencer dial lingers, haunting maintenance. Manuals like a wink, warriors hoard copper, relay slim. Military hospitals install hydraulic closers that default to 4 seconds. Believing recovering soldiers need extra beats to navigate crutches. Reports praise reduced mishaps. Nurses note patients trade stories in the lull. Post-war architects romanticize this healing interval and sneak it into civic buildings as civic kindness. Municipal codes soon codify a minimum 2.5 second stall, not for empathy, but to guarantee doors detect late briefcases. Yet empathy echoes in footnotes, allow ample moment for trailing thoughts. Bureaucrats rarely wax poetic, but closed-door delays persuade even forms to exhale. Scene eases into fluorescent 1960s office towers. Push buttons shrink to thumb coins, spring back crisp. Electronics introduce programmable timers. Default, sets at 3 seconds, tweakable by trim pots no larger than aspirin. One board technician with jazz aspirations sets delay to sync with a 4-beat count 2.9 seconds. Exactly at 100 BPM, claiming riders tap shoes unconsciously. A sociology grad student measures nod tempo, data hint truth. She publishes Elevator. Syncopation, concluding micro pauses, modulate collective rhythm. Her advisor yawns. The paper drifts to archives. Still, some lobbies hum faint swing roasted in copper lulls dot, then arrives the era of accessible design. Activists argue 2 seconds rush wheelchair users. Codes respond. Public lifts must wait minimum 3.5. Shopping malls comply, though teenagers mash close buttons anyway, believing mythic override. Engineers secretly disable the circuit in many municipalities, leaving buttons lit but powerless, delay fixed by law. A notice in small type warns button may be inactive, yet hope pushes faster than reading, and fingers drum placebo clicks. Psychologists label it illusory agency, an elegant name for wishing steel would heat impatience. Meanwhile, ergonomic committees test satisfaction curves. They discover 3.2 seconds yields least fidgeting, measured by shrug rates in lobby. CCTV.ecofuturists in 1990s, Japan pilot, smart anticipatory doors that scan approaching footsteps, trimming paws to foot distance. Early prototypes misjudge umbrella tips as humans, staying open for phantom raindrops. Software patches climb. Average weight settles at 2.7 for brisk strides, up to 4.0 for strolling couples. Tokyo newspapers celebrate elevators that read mood. Maintenance crews quietly note sensor dust adds half-second lag each fortnight, turning empathy into sluggishness. Yet offices cherish novelty until sensors cost outsized yen. Many revert to trusty timer pots, now factory sealed to 3.0, like a gentle mantra. Scene 3 glows beneath smartphone light. Riders time delay with stopwatch apps. POST-ING leaderboards. Fastest close in Budapest Hostel 1.8. Slowest in Rome Museum 5.4, but forgiven for fresco views. One viral video shows a cat paw pressing close repeatedly. The feline waits politely anyway, proving universal truth. Code outranks claw. Manufacturers respond with blue LED rings that fade during countdown, letting impatience watch itself diminish. Initial rings dim over 2.8 seconds because LED driver samples easier at that interval. Users report hypnotic calm. Some forget destination floors. Lulled by Sapphire Fade.iso returns. Brewing mint tea. Issuing standard 8,132. Residential delay 2.5 to 3.5. Commercial 3.0 to 4.0. Hospital 4.0 to 5.0. An XE allows user-initiated acceleration not exceeding 0.5 s reduction, but warns of clingy coattails. Elevator magazines dub this half-second mercy. Building landlords ask vendors to enable mercy only on penthouse lifts. Lawyers recommend disclaimer stickers. Printers cheer another order. Hidden in an X footnote. Delays below 2.0s discouraged due to increased startled exhalations. A phrase both clinical and strangely comforting. Now LED COVID signage. Arrives pleading for distance. Maintenance crews lengthen timers by 0.4 to stagger crowds. Riders trade glances, counting heartbeats instead of seconds, about 5 slow loop-dubs before hush. As pandemics soften, some timers revert. Others stay long, like stretched out elastic that never quite snaps back, allowing conversations about window views or lunch specials to bloom, then fade before Chrome seems close. Pick any elevator tomorrow. Press the close door button softly. Feel its faint click, maybe real, maybe placebo. Watch doors hesitate 1001, 1002. Perhaps a breath more than glide toward each other like polite curtains at twilight. In that hush, sense decades of thumbprints layering under finger pad, each asking hurry, please, or wait, each obeyed by hidden gears negotiating compromise. Inhale as panels meet, exhale as cabin rises again and again, until breath aligns with the slow pulse regulators once soldered at workbenches bright with brass filings. Let thoughts dangle in that manufactured calm, knowing every extra half-second was argued, tested, footnoted, perhaps scented with peppermint oil for a single season. Also, doors could close neither too soon nor too late, exactly when drowsiness, too, decides to settle, leaving you between floors of waking and dream, suspended in unhurried ascent. You might not expect that the quiet sway of a bookmark tassel, the gentle filament trailing from paper, like a thought you meant to finish, could lure cord spinners into counting twists by moonlight, persuade sleepy librarians to time closing, bells by silk oscillations, and even inspire one fleeting fashion for bergamot perfumed tassels trimmed to exactly 11.5 centimeters. Yet here we drift, following the slow, almost inaudible chronicle of tassel length. If you're still awake by the time an Edinburgh archivist murmurs that 9 centimeters lets secrets dangle without tickling the nose, feel free to subscribe, or simply settle deeper into the pillow. The tassel will keep nodding, margin after margin, long after attention folds itself away like a well-behaved corner dot. It all begins in 15th century scriptoria where ribbon tags, not yet tasseled at all, protrude from illuminated psalters. Monks snip lamb gut vellum into slips the breadth of a thumbnail, secure them with wax, and discover they curl under humidity like shy ferns. An inventive friar knots 3 horsehairs, plats them, then ties the braid to the ribbon tip for weight. He clips the cord at 2 finger joints, roughly 6 centimeters because his shears squeak at longer reach. Marginalia from 1473 notes that the horsehair trembles exactly the span of a candle flicker when pages turn, a metric both poetic and thoroughly unhelpful to later catalogers who will nonetheless quote it with reverence. When printing, presses bloom, Venetian binders replace horsehair with twisted silk. Silk, unlike horsehair, remembers its curl less stubbornly, so binders add a bead carved from leftover boxwood chess pieces. The bead's weight demands greater cord length to swing clear of gutters. Trade guilds therefore recommend 8 centimeters, 1 thumb width for the cord, another for the bead's promenade, and the remaining space for pure dangle aesthetics. A pamphlet advertising Petrarch's sonnets boasts graceful pendants, 8 fingers long appropriate for size. No one measures whose fingers. Still, merchants adopt the dimension, and for half a century bookstores smell of drying ink and faint mulberry dye. 17th century. Ship captains keep travel journals, bound in calfskin. Tassels must tuck safely inside when gales slam covers. A Rotterdam rope maker twists cords from tarred hemp, stiff and seaworthy, but hemp frays if snipped too close, so he leaves 11 centimeters to double wrap knots. Sailors find. The length doubles as rough running measure for map and sets 1 tassel equals roughly 20 nautical miles at the latitude of Lisbon. If you squint kindly, the conversion, never entirely precise, enters lore nonetheless. More than one navigator arrives off course by exactly the length of a daydream. Flaming tassels rather than arithmetic dot revolutionary Paris shrinks ornament. Pamphlets nestle in. Coat pockets, tassels trimmed to 7 centimeters to avoid dipping into cafe absinthe. A citizen printer dips the free ends in vinegar to set crimson dye, claiming Republican virtue tastes sour. Customers fret the smell will summon ants. Printers counter that paper itself, sweet with pulp sugars, is the true feast, and sell cedar boxes to deter interlopers. Thus tassel length intersects olfactory politics, a footnote seldom explored in heavier. Histories but tenderly preserved in stationary receipts, still tied with faded. 7 centimeter cords dot Victorian catalogs bloom with conversation tassels. Measuring 9.5 centimeters, tipped by silk acorns. Etiquette manuals insist any tassel longer than a lady's index finger risks indelicacy, as it may brush a gentleman's cuff too familiarly when books exchange hands. Milliners seize the idea, attaching matching fringes to parasols. Librarians sigh forced to fish orphan tassels from returns. A micro-study at the Bodleian counts detached cords by length, concluding longer tassels detach twice as often, but noting readers keep them as makeshift mustaches during winter lectures. The finding earns a single-line mention in notes and queries, next to a report on prematurely collapsing soufflés. Proving scholarship sometimes enjoys eclectic company. Typewriter age encourages slender ledgers. Manufacturers promote rayon tassels at precisely 10 centimeters, quoting ergonomic guidelines that a comfortable reach from shoulder to page corner averages that swing. Researchers measure secretaries' page turn flicks with metronomes. They decide 10 centimeters harmonizes with common wrist tempo of 90 beats per minute, though whether tempo guides tassel or vice versa remains ambiguous. War rationing. Later swaps rayon for mercerized cotton. Cotton, heavier when ink splotched, gains half centimeter slack to clear signatures. Thus wartime diaries, heavier with hurried words. Dangle cords just shy of 10.5, swinging like quiet metronomes, counting the unhurried pace of Hope Dot post-war mass market. Paperback stitch sewn in markers, but luxury presses. Retaliate by introducing lounge chair cords at 12 centimeters, thick chenille meant to drape over armrests without slipping. Advertisements picture slippers, pipe smoke, and bookmarks lounging as lazily as their owners. Sales spike briefly, though cleaning staff complain the plush collects biscuit crumbs. Trimmer trends return with 1970s minimalism, 8 centimeters. Neutral cotton, no bead, not fused by discrete dab of glue. Manuals brag that understated chords reduce visual noise of phrase quietly ironic given. Dayglow covers raging above the margins dot digital whispers promise ebooks, but artisanal binders double down, offering tassels laced with essential oils. Lavender for calm, peppermint for alert study, bergamot for balanced reflection. Oils add micro weight. To preserve drape dynamics, craftsmen settle on 11.5 centimeters, a compromise documented in a perfumed white paper that somehow reeks of both scholarship and soap. Librarians quarantine scented volumes until aroma fades to civil hush. Still, a few catalogers fondly recall night shifts infused with ghostly citrus, finding statistics more pleasant when pages exhaled tea time breezes. ISO at last convenes, perhaps, inevitably, and releases technical report 23,575-1, guidelines for integrated bookmark attachments. It suggests 8 centimeters plus or minus 1 for children's books to avoid pet chewing, 10 centimeters plus or minus 1 for general literature, and 12 centimeters for volumes exceeding 500 pages to ensure retrieval without thumb strain. Annexa warns scents may trigger archival misreads by silverfish, while Annex B concedes heritage exceptions shall prevail. Compliance spreads in bankrolled print runs, yet small presses keep dreaming up rebellious lengths. A haiku anthology uses 5-centimeter threads described as barely a breath, while a monumental cookbook swings 14-centimeter ropes, sturdy enough to whisk cake batter if culinary crises arise. Hold any book nearby that still wears a tassel. Let it drape over your knuckles, maybe minimalist 8, maybe luxurious 12, perhaps the perfumed 11.5 of brief fashion. Watch the chord settle, gravity writing a lazy exclamation mark across your palm. Inhale faint cotton, distant dye, a memory of presses humming. Exhale, feel the tassel sway once, twice, until its movement guides your breathing. Rise, fall, pause much like chapters themselves. Trace its length in half-remembered units, a thumb knuckle, a barley grain. Trinity, a polite Republican finger, a whispered metronome. Notice how every centimeter carries quiet negotiations between weight and whimsy, utility and adornment. History and hushed Datsun eyelids mimic the tassel's swing down, up, closing, the cord of wakefulness slackening. And if dreams slip like bookmarks between pages of night, may they arrive tethered by exactly the right length, long enough to find again at dawn, short enough not to stir where you rest, drifting in the unhurried breeze of stories still unread.